started. Thank you for being here. This is our second Nouveau Synth group. And we are presenting 2 demos and then a main performance and tech talk tonight. And we're going to change just the schedule a little bit. We're going to start with Brent with Roland?
Yes.
Brent with the Roland SH-32. And then we'll have the main performance with Dan and his crew, Next Door 4. And then we'll have the last demo with Ben and the mini movie, which I'm very excited about. I'll just say one thing before we get started. This week I was re-recording, remixing a track that I recorded 10 years ago. And just based on some of the things I've learned incrementally over time, something that I've spent off and on a decade trying to get a good mix down for, I was able to get a decent mix down of in like 45 minutes. And my point is that as I learn things from other artists, going back to old projects that have just been completely unsolvable, all of a sudden become solvable like that. And so I just want to emphasize how learning happens for me, and it's really incremental. So it's not just sitting down for one session and then I know everything. It's these little bits, and then all of a sudden something clicks, and I'm like, oh, I could go back to that one project, and it flows out effortlessly. So just wanted to share that. So let's get started with the Roland SH-32 demo. And I'll be running around with cameras so you can be able to see in detail what knobs are being turned as the demos are happening. Any questions before we get started? Great.
Take notes. Yeah. Just make sure the sound's good.
Oh, that's a looper.
Ready?
Yeah.
All right, first I'll introduce myself. I'm Brent Larson. I perform and record albums as Spycht, S-P-Y-C-H-T. Got 6 albums up on Bandcamp. They're all free. Just search my name, S-P-Y-C-H-T. Nobody else has it. Doesn't share anything in common. Quick Google search, you'll find me. It's a piece of cake. S-P-Y-C-H-T. Most of it's psytrance. There's a little ambience on there. It's a little bit for everybody. This is the Roland SH-32. It is a digital virtual analog synth from roughly 97, 98. It came out after the JP8000. I couldn't find an exact release year on it anywhere. Sound On Sound didn't have it. None of the synth encyclopedias had an exact year. They just stated that it was roughly a follow-up to the JP8000 from 97. It kind of works out as a groove box. It's got a major arpeggiator in here, which will drive both the synth section and a rhythm section. You can play solo patches or a performance section, which will hold 3 synth patches and a rhythm section. And you can basically build a little song and tweak your synth patches as you move back and forth. What you can do with the rhythm section is very limited once you get to that point. So it really truly is just a little groove box. I'm not going to focus much on the performance section because the interface is awful and I just get lost. I don't know how anybody ever would have performed on it. But as just, you know, a solo little drum machine or a single patch, it sounds great. There are a lot of options for layering things in the performance section if you want to layer the 3 synth patches where things can get really huge, which is nice considering it's a VA and it's digital, so it lacks a lot of the sub that you're going to hear coming out of that guy. We just won't do it today because I don't want to accidentally kill audio and spend 3 minutes trying to figure out what the heck I've done on this terrible interface. So ultimately they call this a 4-part multi-timbral desktop synth module. Roland refers to this as wave acceleration synthesis. Roland has a bad habit of just making up synthesis types. Ultimately, it's a multi-sampled oscillator. So they just recorded oscillators and, you know, saved a few cycles or a single cycle and just did it all the way up all the octaves, and then they made it available. There are 7 waveforms, your standard stuff, you know, the saw, square, pulse width, sample and hold, and a spectrum area. There's also a noise section. Each one has up to 11 variations. So I mean, just the saw alone, once you start different variations. You got a huge range of different tones, and then moving into like the spectrum, say. they've sampled special waveforms from all of their synths over the year. You can get a lot of really varied stuff out of this synth, but it does tend to sound a little plasticky due to the fact that it's just a multi-sampled oscillator. It just misses all that magic. It does have this really nice analog feel option. You can kind of get it to waver a little bit instead of just being a straight waveform. Oscillator would as the voltage changes a little bit. You can move that. Right now it's at 62. I think you can bump it up to 240 something and it's chaos. It is relatively anticipated. It just takes a waveform. It does the same thing over and over and over. So the higher you turn it up, the more you recognize what somebody is doing. So it's got two oscillators that are controlled by a balance on the left. It's got a pitch envelope. You can set your envelope for that pitch. You've got PWM control, and you've got the coarse pitch over here, just for setting it where you need it. Each oscillator has two sub-oscillators, plus one, negative one. You can also go subsonic on that oscillator. The unit does offer ring modulation and sync between the oscillators. Due to the hardware at the time, both those options really start to limit things, in particular the sync. It basically knocks it down to the two oscillators, the one sync to the other, filters out of there. A lot of the control is just gone. It's just straightforward synced oscillators. So a lot of the magic disappears. It's got 4 filters: low pass, band pass, high pass, and a peaking filter. So normally you would expect a low pass, band pass, and high pass in your synths, but the peaking filter really is interesting. It's not horribly common, and it is exactly what it sounds like. It just creates a little hum, right, where you've got your frequency cut off set to, and the higher your resonance is, the higher that hum is. So I mean, if you want to distort the output of this unit, you can turn on the distortion, you can crank the output, turn on that peaking filter, slam your resonance in there, and it gets gritty in a really ugly digital way. You can get a lot of high-end noise out of this thing. So if you're into chiptune, lo-fi stuff, bit noise music, and you don't want to go with the traditional synth, this is a great option. It's got a lot of that stuff in there. The units are getting kind of old, so they've got quirks. This one occasionally will hold on a MIDI note, and I'll have to reset it. If I put an arpeggiator to this from a sequencer and bump it up to 200 BPM, freaks out. Cannot handle it. And I mean, it's kind of expected. If it's from 97, it is what it is. And it probably did perform a little better in its youth. It sat in my closet for a long time. This is the first synth that I ever bought back in 2008 or 2009. And it was about $350 on eBay at the time. You can get one for roughly the same price now. They really haven't changed much. It's just there.
Sounds like a good investment.
No, for a first synth, it's not a bad choice. I mean, it's a challenge with the interface. Obviously, this knob right here controls everything from system to your reverb delay and your insert effects, which I'll get to in a moment here. But you set it, and then you get to read your 3 digits here and try and figure out what this thing is telling you. And it takes the manual, which is pretty thick, and to be honest, reads like a salesperson. It was an experience learning this thing, and I put it in the closet for a reason. I do bust it out from time to time when I need something that will act as a VA. I also have a Virus TA, or a Virus TI, so it doesn't come out that much anymore. I just don't need it. Usually it'll come out for classic 80s bass tones, and then I will layer a sub underneath it in my DAW with something very simple to get that fat richness that it lacks because of the weak oscillators. All right, so we covered the types of filters. Obviously the low pass and high pass offer a 12 and 24 decibel. Most digital synths will offer those. You've got a attack decay, sustained release, envelope control, and you can set it to key follow, positive or negative. You've got 2 LFOs that can be routed to multiple destinations. You can route to multiple destinations at once. You can send to oscillator 1 pitch, oscillator 2 pitch, filter, amp, and pan. It's got 7 waveforms: triangle, sine, sawtooth, square, trapezoid, sample and hold, and a random, which is just a smooth sample and hold. It's essentially the same waveform. They just roll the values off. There's no control over that roll, so depending on what tempo you have it at, you can hear some weird things going on. You can also set it to fade in if you want, so it can act as like an attack on that LFO, so like say you were playing a bass line and you only wanted it to do like a sine wave mod. When you hold in your note, you can get it to delay, which is really nice. Not a lot of synths have that. You can set the oscillator to key sync, which also is missing on a lot of synths that I currently own, and you can set it to beat sync. So you can either sync to the internal arpeggiator or an external MIDI signal if you set it in the system, which is about 4 minutes worth of work on this setup, but you can do it. It doesn't sync the best. MIDI in this unit is sloppy. I don't know whether it's my unit or SH-32s as a whole, because I've never actually seen another one in real life. So it's got 2 sections of effects here. It's got a reverb and delay section, which is just dedicated reverb and delay, and it's got an insert effects section, which has everything under the sun, from shaping tools to more reverbs and delays to other things that you would expect, like flangers, pitch feedback units, chorus, things of that nature.
Can we hear some of those?
You want me to read the whole list? I'll read the whole list.
No, the sound, the effects.
Oh, the effects. All
Yeah,
right. We can see what we can. Right now, it is dry. Delay. If I turn it on, you can hear it kind of twisting off into the distance. There's a delay. Right now, we've just got an init patch. I guess I'm still on Spectrum here. Got no filter on, so we can turn the filter on. Really hear it off into the distance. And then the insert effects, I don't think we should really go into those because it's really finicky here. And this is the 3 value screen thing that I'm talking about. I don't know what any of these mean unless I've got the manual in front of me. It's really, truly gibberish. Other things that you would expect from a synth, you know, solo mode, which basically turns it into monophonic, unison mode, which will turn it to solo mode and stack 4 voices on top of each other. Once you start getting into the unison and the performance, your number of voices start to limit. So you get things like voice stealing and things like that happening, where you'll lose a note to grab another note because you're just playing too much at once and the engine can't handle it. It also offers legato. Most synths do, you know, so you can get like 1 note to move into the next. Rhythm sounds. Sounds for days. It's got
So are those all samples then? Or?
yeah,
Okay.
everything in here is sampled. Yeah,
Gotcha.
It's originally some sort of audio type that's in the RAM on this unit that you can manipulate with the engine that they built around it. Yeah, unfortunately, none of this is being calculated, and none of it is actually coming from the electricity itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's all audio, which really lends to its tone being a little plasticky and weak, and it follows through with the drum samples to a certain extent. Each drum sample you can tweak individually. Maybe. Won't let me. You're supposed to be able to tweak each one of these samples individually. You're supposed to be able to set the filter so that you can filter them and change the pitch, as well as your decay over here and your sustain and release to get different tones. For whatever reason right now it does not work. I should just be able to play these and then it should start. The unit may not be working. From time to time it will not do things that I want it to do. Sometimes it's my fault, sometimes it's the unit's fault. It's always a joy when I bring it out. So the performance section, we'll see if I can get anything out of it here. So it'll allow you to play whatever patch you have selected over here, and then it will play a static arpeggio that it has set for the rhythm section. And you know, you can adjust things a little bit, but there's not a whole lot of control there. And before I get into too much trouble, I'm just gonna back out into patch here, because I would hate to make silence. All right, we're at 13 minutes here. Downsides with this unit, the filter steps. So you know, when you hold super obvious in form, but you will hear stepping when you manually change the cutoff filter with your hand. If you use the filter envelope or automation through MIDI, you will not hear that. But it's the number one thing that you will read about this synthesizer online. If you look up SH-32, I guarantee the first sentence that you read is going to be the filter steps. A lot of people don't like it, but I really like it when you put the reverb and the delay on there and you're going for something weird. It sounds kind of neat. The faders jump when they're touched. They're not, you know, endless rotary encoders. So if your release is down at the bottom and the patch that you're playing is up at the top, as soon as you touch it, it's going to drop back down. That's just kind of the nature of the beast. Like I mentioned earlier, the ring modulation and the oscillator sync cause problems. The ring modulation, you can't combine it with pulse width modulation or the sub oscillator. When you select the sync, it makes the patch monophonic. It takes out the filter. You can't use waveform variations. The sub oscillator is gone, pulse width modulation disabled, and so is unison. So you've really truly just got one oscillator being synced by the other. There's not much control other than the VCA. That's the synth. I had planned on rolling through some presets here, but I don't want to take up anybody's time. We're already at 15 minutes. Does anybody have any questions?
And this is something we wanted to change with this one, is to have the Q&A more rolling rather than just after the main performance. So definitely if you have any questions or want more information about anything.
Is there any analog circuitry in that? No. Interesting.
None whatsoever.
So it's all digital samples?
All digital.
Yep.
Every bit about this is digital.
Is there MIDI through one? I just see the
There is no MIDI through on this unit. Nope, just in and out.
So can you drive anything else with it?
You can. You can take the arpeggiator out and you can drive other synths with it. Yeah, it's definitely possible. Yeah, I believe you can even set the MIDI channel for the arpeggiator on the output, but I'd have to go through the manual, and just like everything else, it's probably going to take several minutes to get that done because the interface.
So is it that type of menu dive that was really popular with Roland in the
Yeah.
90s, where it's just you have to go through menu just to change minor
how
things?
it works, if I wanted to change something in the system, I would crank this knob all the way to the system, and then I've got all of these labeled units down here that I can select.
Could you put that up again?
System over here, and I've got all these units down here: tune, local, remote, foot switch, clock, MIDI channel, and depending on which one I have selected, you know, I can change a different value. And then there's a couple of these buttons here that also interact with this that will change from what you're seeing here to another option, and then you'll set it with the value. So yeah, it kind of takes the manual unless you're really familiar with it. I was in touch with it for about 3 months before I bought the virus and chucked this thing right in the closet.
So what I'm hearing is it's really intuitive.
Oh, super.
Yeah.
If Roland made another unit, I'm sure that they would go exactly with all of the choices they made. Because
Yep.
I'm sure they're super proud.
And it came out in 97. What?
It looks to me like they tried to do the layout for somebody who likes the tactile feel of an analog synth, but it doesn't necessarily incorporate
That's
the
exactly
digital
correct.
menu-isms that it really is.
Yep. Yeah, I mean,
It's
they
like,
really
let's
just want
select
people
to
to
this
touch
knob.
it.
You're like, well, that's not how filing systems work.
No, not at all.
Huh.
But I think at that point, you know, they got everything on here, and they just needed system access, and that was a last minute thing because it was necessary. I mean, like, we haven't even gotten into like SysX patches and stuff, which is a whole other world.
But it's got the knobs that people want to be able to play with.
Yep. Yeah, it's
And that's
playable.
the-
I mean,
rather than
if
like,
you're playing a solo synth patch with a keyboard, this thing is a blast, an absolute blast. Anything else?
Cool.
All right.
Well, thank you. It's a round of applause for.